Hey everybody, Trey here. Nah, just messing with you. It's actually Ethan here. But I'm doing a forecasting video. Granted, it's not going to be nearly as good as a Convective Chronicles video. Trey does an awesome job over there, obviously, but we have a slight risk for severe weather or a level 2 out of 5 for the northeastern United States tomorrow, June 23rd, 2024, aka Sunday. And I'm going to be chasing tomorrow. I just came back from Chasecation, but I cannot deny a setup like this over my native northeastern United States. So let's get right on into it, starting with the SPC outlook for tomorrow. This is the day 2 convective outlook issued early this morning. And as you can see, we have the slight contour from northern Pennsylvania into the upstate New York vicinity, Vermont, New Hampshire, western Massachusetts. So, this nice broad area for severe weather expected, but the most interesting thing is the tornado contours. So we have a 2% across that slight vicinity, but a more focused corridor of the 5% contour over Vermont, New Hampshire, kind of the upper Champlain Valley in New York here, and western Massachusetts. So a pretty focused corridor for that 5% contour. It's going to get a little bit more dialed in, I imagine, come the day 1 outlooks tomorrow morning. Nonetheless, we're going to dive into it and get a broad sense of what's going on here. So let's first start with the surface map that has been most recently published. This is the 9Z, so it's actually probably going to update here in a little bit as this surface low here has kind of moved further east. But nonetheless, this is the... Let me just grab a quick screenshot of this guy. HDR kind of messing with the screenshot here, but that's fine. Anywho, so if we quickly just kind of annotate what's going on here, this surface low here is going to be the primary driver of the system here, as we're going to have a little bit of a 500 millibar flow disturbance aloft that's going to be driving this thing. Nonetheless, we kind of got this funky cold front drooping behind and into Colorado there, and then this long, warm / stationary front that is draped across much of the northern United States. But nonetheless, this guy is going to be moving due east across this way and eventually into kind of this southern Ontario region, southwestern Ontario. And that's going to be, like I said, the main driver of the system here. And it's going to cause a severe weather risk kind of in this corridor here in northwestern Iowa today. But nonetheless, we're focused on tomorrow's risk. So let's pop over into our College of DuPage models viewer. We're going to be looking at the ZixZ NAM, which ran earlier today. The NAM is kind of in its happy range at the moment, kind of that 24-hour to 36-hour range that it probably operates the best at. Nonetheless, it still has a lot of biases. If we're to quote E.B. Box, who has the famous quote of all models are wrong, but some are useful. You got to keep in mind these are not exact outputs of what's going to happen. This is just kind of giving us a sense of what we can expect. So with that preface out of the way, let's kind of get into what is going on here. So starting with initialization, we kind of got some little bit of flow going on here with this little shortwave trough in the northern, or the central high plains, I should say. And as we kind of advance the slider here, it's going to kind of ramp up in intensity and translate its way into the northeastern United States. So as we said, that surface low is going to be dragged with it, pretty much due east, maybe an east-northeast component to it, but it's going to end up somewhere probably in the southwestern Ontario region. So let's dive into the northeast sector specifically. And as you can see, with flow aloft here in the very early afternoon, 18Z translates to 2 p.m. in Eastern Daylight Time. We have pockets of 65 plus knots of 500 millibar flow aloft, so a lot of wind speed over the northeastern United States to support severe storms. As we go down a little bit into the 700 millibars, much of the same story, still a lot of flow aloft, And as we get into the temperatures up above, pretty cool up aloft, 8, 9 Celsius. So there's going to be potent amounts of instability underneath this 700 millibar region of the atmosphere. But once we get down to 925 millibars, much closer to the surface, do we really kind of get a full sense of what's going on here. So here at 18Z, 2 p.m. local time, we got that surface low kind of apparent here, which is probably going to be somewhere in this southwestern Ontario region. But we got some nice southerly flow channeling up into New England and eastern New York here. And as you can see, where the surface low kind of is located, right over here, significant backing that's going to loop back around over Quebec, southern Ontario here. So this surface low is really going to skirt kind of along probably the Adirondacks here if I had to guess. But nonetheless, its timing is pretty good for northeastern supercells. It's going to delay that cold front that's going to eventually crash through probably that night. So if we are to pop into the surface and check temperatures real quick, yeah, that cold front is going to kind of lag behind a little bit and then crash through later in the day tied to that surface low. As you can see, that surface low is somewhere in here, and it's going to crash through New England that night. But during the day, we're going to have a nice potent warm sector here. Temperature's not too hot, though, in our primary target area. As you can see, kind of in the upper 70s the further north you go, and then the low 80s. But then you get down into like New Jersey and the lower Hudson Valley. That's where you're going to have some really hot temperatures, nearing 100 degrees in some spots. But up here where we have potent moisture as well, the temperature dew point spread shouldn't be too severe. So getting into that dew point spread as we were talking about. So as you can see, some obvious moisture biasing from the NAM. It likes to pump up the moisture, but nonetheless, we should still expect to see 70 dew points throughout this region. As you can see, the Hudson Valley here, right near Albany, 77 degrees. So it's probably a little bit inflated because it's the NAM, but nonetheless, we're going to have pockets of great moisture, especially in those lake/river valleys. Champlain being up this way, Hudson Valley down here, Connecticut River Valley here. So lots of pockets of deep moisture. And with the temperatures that we have at play, that temperature dew point spread should be pretty mild and allow for pretty low-based storms. So nothing too highly elevated that would normally kind of limit that tornado potential. So with that in mind, with the temperature dew points, all that in mind, we're going to kind of get a view of kind of our convective parameters here, starting off with the ML Cape, where we have, as you can see, kind of the Hudson Valley in here and then into western Massachusetts, greater than 2,000 joules per kilogram, in some spots 2,500 joules per kilogram of that ML Cape. And then as you trail north here, it kind of decreases, but nonetheless, nice focus corridor of that instability. Looking into our low-level lapse rates, once again, across New York, southern Vermont, and western Massachusetts, we have great low-level lapse rates to support a tornadic environment greater than 8 Celsius per kilometer. In some spots, we're even getting up to 9, so great low-level lapse rates. Where things lack a little bit are the mid-level lapse rates. Things are pretty much below 6 Celsius per kilometer in much of the mid-levels, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue in my eyes as we kind of go into our 0 to 3 kilometer SRH here. As you can see, there's just a potent amount of storm relative helicity just kind of existing over the region here, well above 200 meters per second squared. The further north you go, closer to the stronger elements of the low and the eventual warm front, and then even pockets of 150 meters squared per second squared of SRH in the 0 to 3 kilometer range. So plenty of low level shear in place that should cause rotational thunderstorms in this warm sector. So once things start to fire off early in the day, we have some initial capping, which is honestly a good thing when it comes to the northeastern United States. Things love to go upscale quickly, especially when there's a cold front in play. The cold front is a little bit delayed here, which is a great thing, and then as we can see, the lid strength index as over the Adirondacks, we definitely have a little bit more capping involved, which is not too concerning, as we don't like chasing up this way. But then as we kind of go through the Mohawk River Valley here, we had a nice kind of lid here that should keep things fairly isolated. And then through the Hudson Valley, nice and a little bit capped as well, which is important for northeastern isolated tornado setups. You need a little bit of capping, as counterintuitive as that sounds. But these are the types of things that I really like to see when it comes to northeastern tornado setups. So honestly, this corridor in here could be a favorable region for storms. Once the cams get a little bit closer, we can kind of get an idea of where some of the storms it likes to pop off are going to occur. We're still a little bit outside of that ideal range, but the overall environment should support isolated severe thunderstorms. Let's take a quick look at a sounding. We're going to quickly just kind of grab a screenshot of this guy and use our snipping tool here so we can annotate on it. Pull it up. Zoom in a little bit. There we go. And just kind of get a sense of the overall environment here. So just looking at our SKU real quick. So this was taken at 18Z in the northeastern vicinity. This is just kind of an overall environmental sounding. I tried not to cherry pick one, just to kind of get a sense of the overall environment. So nonetheless, here's our cape kind of in here. Skinny cape, which is not atypical for the Northeast. We don't really get those big fat capes that we're used to seeing in the Southern Plains, but nonetheless, this should be more than enough for supercell thunderstorms and tornadoes. As you can see down here, we have 2200 in the mix layer, and then surface base nearing 4,000 joules per kilogram. Getting down kind of here, as we can see, the LCL height's very low with an 83-75 dew point spread. Like I said, NAM moisture bias, so this is probably a little bit inflated, but nonetheless, even if we're at 70, that should be a pretty good TD spread to support tornadoes. Once you get beyond, like I would say, 20 degrees of disparity between the actual temperature and surface dew point temperature, then that's where you start running into issues. But something like this should definitely get the job done in my eyes. Getting into kind of our lapse rates here, the low-level lapse rates, 7.5 Celsius per kilometer, that should definitely be sufficient. And then obviously, like I said earlier, the mid-levels kind of mid and not very potent, and that's probably the one slacking thing in this setup around that 6 Celsius per kilometer range. Getting into more over here, the hodograph. As you can see, with this particular sounding, we don't have much backing in the low levels here, but still enough of a southerly component here where we kind of have that a little bit of that streamwise vorticity. Not ideal, I would say, but plenty of low-level flow working its way up in that storm relative motion. Some great views here. Storm motions are going to be pretty fast from what it looks like, nearing 40 knots, just kind of going off of the right motion bunkers here. And then looking down here into our shears, going from surface to 6 kilometers, 53 knots of bulk shear. And then our SRH values from surface to 3 kilometers here, over 200 meters squared per second squared. So some great shear in play, and an overall favorable hodograph for tornadoes. Granted, it's not a prolific tornado hodograph, but for the Northeast, this is a really good hodograph. And, we start, kind of slacking up top. It's not like your typical, Dixie Alley where the upper level winds are just ramping off the page here. But nonetheless, this should be enough upper level flow, 50 to 60 knots, that should vent storms sufficiently. We're not seeing that hodograph kind of fold back in on itself, which would be problematic. But just because of the moisture content, there should be a little bit of an expectation for maybe a high precipitation storm mode. But we should have some rain-free updrafts for early cells, and maybe some isolated shots at low precipitation tornadoes before the storm really gets ramped up, and then the tornadoes really ramp in all of that precipitation into their updraft. But nonetheless, this is a very good sounding to see if you're a fan of northeastern tornadoes. Now, kind of getting away from the forecasting side of things and diving into kind of the terrain that we can expect, as this is kind of the main limiting factor for the northeastern United States. The setup itself is great, right? But it's the terrain that you really have to play if you're going to capitalize on a northeastern tornado setup. So I quickly imported the 6Z Day 2 categorical outlook. Tornado contours are highlighted at the moment. So as you can see, like I said earlier, Vermont, New Hampshire, Western Massachusetts, and Eastern New York up this way. Turning them off so we can kind of get a better sense of the terrain here. We can kind of really get a sense of what's going on based on kind of the color shadings. So if we are to grab a quick screenshot here and really annotate this guy, we'll get a sense of the playable areas for the northeastern United States. So the areas that you really like to see are these lighter greens. These areas are the places that have agricultural, we have like the Mohawk River Valley here that has a lot of farm fields and stuff like that. As we go further north, we get into, this is Lake Champlain, and then we have the Champlain Valley kind of nestled up in here. So this is a great corridor for chasing, but then where you start running into problems when it comes to Vermont is this stretch right along here. These are the Green Mountains, and they are borderline impossible to chase. Actually, I'll even go as far to say is impossible to chase. Limited roads going over the mountains, obviously, trees up the wazoo, and you can get weird terrain interactions with storms. The Burlington radar up here, it's somewhere around here, actually can't see over the mountains right here. So storms that go beyond the mountains here, you kind of enter this dead spot where you can't really see the low levels of the storm, and you actually have to rely on Portland's radar, which is really far away, to even get any idea of what's happening at the low levels, just because of how much these mountains really eliminate what's going on from the radar's view. And obviously Portland's radar is having to go through the White Mountains over here, so it's just not an ideal setup for trying to get any idea of what's going on with the storms. You have to really rely on visuals, and you can't get visuals in the Green Mountains. It's really tough. But this corridor right here is golden. That Middlebury, north of Rutland corridor is great chase terrain. I've chased up here a couple of times, but nonetheless, it's not very wide. So you have to hope that those supercells can mature before then, which they often can, because, you kind of get those, valley channeling enhancements with the southerly flow. Obviously we have the Adirondack Mountains here. This is basically no-go for chasing. As you can see, lots of green, no road options, lots of mountains and lakes, and very limited cell reception up this way. So it's kind of this narrow corridor if you're playing northern Vermont that you really are going to have an opportunity to see anything. Further south we go, things get better. So obviously you still have the Adirondacks up this way, which you can't chase. And then down here you have the Catskill Mountains, which you can't chase. But in the middle there, like through Oneonta, Cooperstown, and then out this way, obviously out this way is fantastic chase terrain, but that's a little too far west for tomorrow's setup. But the Mohawk Valley here, right in here, is golden stuff for northeast chasing. This is some of the best chase terrain you're going to find in the northeastern United States. So depending on where things set up tomorrow, this might be a great place to play in terms of a tornado setup. If you can get a tornadic supercell in here, you're going to be golden across this Mohawk River and northern Hudson Valley. If we go a little further south, the Hudson Valley, southern Hudson Valley in this corridor, east of the Catskills is great. And then going into western Massachusetts, you can play the Connecticut River Valley pretty well. Even some spots, around Pittsfield, right in here, kind of this little corridor in the Berkshires can be pretty good, but nonetheless, you still are dealing with the Berkshire Mountains, which run through here and can be problematic. But those are the places that I would personally play. We'll see how the setup evolves over time. If you like this video, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Give me your thoughts on what's going on. I'll do more of these probably for Northeastern local setups. Kind of give you my thoughts on what's going on, but nonetheless, should be an interesting day tomorrow on Sunday, and I'm gonna be chasing. You can follow me on Twitter at eMoriartyWX. That's where I post a lot of my live updates and stuff like that in terms of chasing and kind of what's going on with storms. So follow me there if you want to get a sense of what I'm doing for my chasing tomorrow. Anywho, thanks guys for watching. See ya.